Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock, and we are about to kick off our webinar today, which is on Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions from data to refrigerants. So we'll just give it maybe say maybe 2 or 3 minutes to 10:05 so that we can have a few more people on the call, and then we can kick off. Just confirming my audio is okay from your end. You can just give a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let's give it just 2 or 3 more minutes and then we can start.
Don't mind.
Okay, great. It's 10:05. My name is Stephen Kimenye, and I'm the project manager, the program manager here at Global Compact Network Kenya. I welcome you all to this webinar session. So we'll kick off with a round of introductions. With me here, I have Damaris from our communications team who will take us through that, and then we'll take it away. Over to you, Damaris.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Like Stephen said, I'm Damaris. I'm the Comms and Marketing Manager at Global Compact Network Kenya, and it's delightful to see all of you joining us in. So we will start with the other GCNK team member I see on the call, Lorraine, and then we'll go through the list.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Lorraine Kethenji in the Programs Department with Stephen Kimenye. I have a target gender equality banner because I am in the social sustainability spectra. Happy to be here.
Brilliant, Lorraine. So let's start off with Alice, apologies. Alice, if you can unmute, just share with us your organization and your role.
Thank you, Damaris. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
My name is Alice Ayuma. I work for Sustaining PLC as an assistant manager, ESG and sustainability. Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome. I see Anthony is on hold, so we'll jump on to Cicely.
Good morning. How are you? My name is Cicely Wijanja. I'm from Kamusat, Kenya. I am the ENS officer.
Welcome, Cicely. We move to Emmanuel Musembi. Hi, Emmanuel. Can you hear us? Maybe
Hello.
Emmanuel.
Good morning.
Hi.
Sorry, I was on
No
mute.
worries.
My name is Emmanuel Musembi. I'm a procurement manager at Sustain PLC. Glad to be here.
Karibu sana. We move to Felix Mvuli.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Felix, EHS Compliance Manager at Sustain PLC.
Wonderful. Welcome. Then we have Ms. Joyce Wanja. Okay. We can move on to Gordon Otieno. Oh,
All right.
my internet is gone.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you. I'm Gordon Otieno, Procurement Officer for Ulu Bank. Thank you.
Welcome, Gordon. We have Haluwiya Abdi.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Halia from National Bank of Kenya. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation. Thank you.
Karibu. Irene Masharia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Irene. I'm a sustainability intern. Glad to be here.
Welcome, Irene. And then we also have Irene from Aliad. Irene Onyango? No matter, we can move to Isaac. Oh my. Oh, I see Isaac, you've unmuted. Go ahead. We're not getting audio, Isaac. Perhaps it's an issue with the mic. We'll leave you time to resolve. We can move to Jacob Osoro. Steve, is it me? Am I the problem? I can't seem to hear anyone on the call.
I think maybe some people are still on mute.
I just
Okay.
joined. I don't know what we're doing.
Jacob, we can hear you now. Please proceed.
I just joined. I needed some guidance on what we're doing.
Oh, we're just introducing ourselves, our role in our organization.
Thank you. My name is Jacob Shoro. I am the ENS and GHG manager from Kamusat, Kenya.
Welcome, Jacob. Let's move to Jane Kamal. Okay, let's hop over to John Lemayan.
Good morning, team. My name is John Kepue. I handle sustainability at National Bank of Kenya. Glad to be in this conversation to just have a better understanding on scope 1, 2, and 3 as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Lemaron. We also have Lenamuni. We can hop over to Louis Dopoy. Oh, wait, Lenamuyi, I see you unmuted. Please go ahead.
My name is Lenamuyi. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Karibu sana. Let's move to Louis Dopoy.
Good morning, Damaris.
Morning.
My name is Lewis Dopoy, Sustainability Assistant Saruni Basecamp.
Haribo. Mary, do you want to say hello?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary. I also work here at GCNK as the Participant Engagement Manager. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to a great session. Thank you.
Amazing, that's Mary. We move to Melvin Butuk.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melvin Butuk, graduate in training at Isuzu East Africa in the Sustainability and Corporate Research Department. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, welcome. Marcy Imali, colleague to Lewis, I assume.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Marcy Imali from Saruni Basecamp, the sustainability team lead. And at Saruni Basecamp, we are very keen in tracking our carbon emission. That's why this meeting is very purposeful for us. So thank you.
Haribo. We next have Michael Msioka.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here. My name is Dr. Michael Musyoka. I belong to Isuzu East Africa, manager in charge of corporate research and sustainability. Journey moving towards carbon neutral, very important for Isuzu East Africa. We're looking into setting the baseline of our carbon emissions. This year, we intend to start financial reports supported by Scope 1 and 2 emissions as per the regulatory guidelines. Next year, it will be mandatory.
Wonderful. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. We have Minis Kayoni.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Johnson Minis from Saruni Basecamp, sustainability champion. Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome. We have Monica Masharia.
Morning, everyone. My name is Monica Macharia from the Sustainability Department at NCBA. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to a great session.
Thank you so much. Peter Kamau.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Kamau. I'm the fleet manager at Saruni Basecamp, and Masi Imali is our lead when it comes to sustainability. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, we have Rita Kimathi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rita Kimathi with the sustainability team NCBA Bank. Thank you.
Welcome. Tiffany Nyawambi.
Good morning, I'm Tiffany. I lead the data science function at Sasini PLC.
Welcome, Tiffany. Next, we have Valentino Cheng.
Good morning, everyone. Valentino Cheng, Hako Industries. I am the Executive Assistant to the Managing Director and the ESG Coordinator. Thank you.
Haribo. We have Washington Glenn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Glenn from Kenya Airways. I represent the Sustainability Department. Looking forward for an engaging session.
Wonderful. As we wind up, we have Wendy Boyd.
Good morning. I'm from Sasini PLC. I head sustainability and ESG. Thank you.
Wonderful. Priscilla Were. You could give Priscilla a moment as we wind up with Winnie Abwao. Okay, Winnie has introduced herself from Aliad in the chat. So I'm sure there are other people who joined. You could introduce yourself in the chat as we continue with the session. But thank you so much again for joining, and I hand over the session to Stephen.
Thank you, Damaris, for taking us through that. And I think it's important when we kick off to understand who's also in the room. So we've had a lot of agri businesses. We've had from the logistics, the banks, manufacturing sector. So this conversation is relevant across the different industries and organizations that we come from, and we should be able to find relevance at the end of it to our individual organizations. So the objective for this course is to understand greenhouse measurement and management, as well as the reporting across your value chains. So over the next 1.5 hours, we'll take a practical sort of hands-on approach. So please make sure you have your book and pen close by. We'll have a few mock calculations just to see how we are processing the information. But we look at greenhouse gas emissions, what they are, why they matter to our businesses, how to measure them, and how to turn the data that we are getting from this measurement into better decisions for our businesses. So whether you're from sustainability or finance or operations or strategy, you should find something in this session as a key takeaway. We'll use some generic examples so that we can apply them across the different industries, and we'll do some of the calculations together. So please come and have your paper and pen and calculator close by. So this is just a rehash of the same, but as I mentioned, this is mainly the objective is to take you from understanding to measuring to understanding how to use the data that you are capturing. There's quite a bit of jargon as is expected because of the topic of GHG, but as we go through it, we'll keep the language light, but we'll capture all the semantics, the words, the terminologies. We'll have them on the decks so that they're easy referral points once you come back to this. So first up, we'll go through some few basics, foundations around GHG. We've had people from different sectors, some in the sustainability field, or maybe in a strategy position might understand GHG, but we also recognize that there's people in the room might have different levels of understanding. So what are GHG gases? What are greenhouse gases? So I like to use this image, which is called the greenhouse effect. Normally when sunlight reaches the earth, it warms the surface. So we have an optimal temperature that we require the earth to be in so that we can survive, live, and function, as well as other life on earth. As this sunlight reaches the earth, some of it is radiated back towards space. Greenhouse gases absorb and remit part of this heat, keeping, like I mentioned, the planet warm enough for life. But when the concentration of greenhouse gases increases, and this is because of human activity, such as the activities you're seeing here, manufacturing, burning of fossil fuels, industrial production, deforestation, more heat is retained within the atmosphere than is required. So as a result, less heat escapes into space, causing the Earth's surface temperature to rise over time. And this is now what is contributing to the broader challenges that we're seeing, the climate challenges, shifting weather patterns, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and what we're seeing a lot more of, which is more frequent extreme weather events. And those are the events, of course, have another ripple effect, the impact on our health, the impact on access to food and water, the impact productivity, especially when you look at it, for example, from a manufacturing perspective, and also leads to a lot of poverty because people are displaced, people are struggling to find, to maintain good health or access food and water reliably. So this is why this conversation matters for us today. Right, so I'll jump straight into terminologies so that as we reference them throughout the webinar, we are familiar. The Greenhouse Protocol, it's an accepted greenhouse gas accounting standard. So as we understand what they are, where they come from, our objective is to measure. And why measure? Because that data is going to help us make decisions. So how do we measure, account for greenhouse? We have a framework that has been given to us, called the Greenhouse Protocol. There are two broad categories for greenhouse gas emissions, and this stems from anthropogenic, let's not use the big words, but activities that are driven by man. So, for example, fuel combustion. And the other ones arrive from nature by itself in its normal operation, like decomposition or combustion of biomass. So there are those two different lenses through which you look at GHG. We'll focus heavily on the anthropogenic sources, which is the activities that we do as business. This framework also organizes the emissions into the three scopes that we're talking about. Scope 1, which is direct emissions from organizations. Scope 2, which is emissions in general from purchased energy, so to speak. And Scope 3, which is value chain emissions. So emissions down further stream, things to do with your suppliers, things to do with logistics, things to do with product use. And while all these scopes 1 and 2 are typically easier to measure because they are closer to you. Scope 3 often represents the largest share of emissions and the biggest opportunity for impact. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail as we go forward. So there are 7 key gases based on the protocol for greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons. These are big words. Perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, nitrogen trifluoride. And it's hard to see all of these gases when you think of it from a business perspective. But at a high level, carbon dioxide emissions are the primary driver. They're the primary driver for climate change. And they come from, the process that Ali mentioned, the things we always think about, burning of fossil fuels or industrial processes, like maybe say manufacturing or maybe say cement. Or methane emissions in business stem from operations like waste management, agriculture, wastewater treatment. Now I'll go through them in a bit more detail so we can see where they are and how to capture them before we go into the measurement side. So like I mentioned, carbon dioxide, fossil fuels, examples, vehicles or industrial processes. Methane, agriculture, wastewater, mining, and now we can start thinking of things like livestock, landfill gas. This falls in scope 1 most of the time. You have nitrous oxide, which comes from the burning of fuel or fertilizer use, for example. So very relevant to the agricultural sector as well. But depending on where you are from and how you interact with the ecosystem, you can see which ones are relevant. Hydrofluorocarbon, any office space that you can think of, refrigeration, AC systems, that's where it's generated from. Perfluorocarbons, now we're talking about electronics and manufacturing and those emissions that arise from that sector. You have sulfur hexafluoride, which again still now coming into this technical side of electronics, insulation, magnesium, those kinds of metals, high voltage equipment, all of those produce emissions. And then lastly, we have nitrogen trifluoride. So we'll try not to dwell too much on the terminologies, but it is important because they form the framework of how you report across these different gases. So the last one is around LCD screens, semiconductors, the components of computing and phones and stuff like that. It's important to mention them because they have different standards of measure. The unit standard of measure is carbon dioxide. So we look at all of these from a lens of carbon dioxide. Different gases warm the planet differently. So our objective as we go through this is to convert the emissions that we receive from different areas into its carbon dioxide equivalent. And there's a formula which we've put down there, which is the mass of the gas. Yeah. So this could be in kg or in tons. Yeah. And then we multiply it by the global warming potential. So you can see the global warming potential is there. Yeah. Thereafter you get the CO2 equivalent. So and we'll go through it in practice so it becomes a bit clearer. So, first example, refrigeration. I like to use this one because it's familiar to all organizations. And we take the example of a refrigeration leak. The small leaks that we have within our organization can outweigh fuel savings. You know, if we have we have a higher category of those gases from the bottom of the table that we had before. So the first objective is to identify the gas in a fridge, which is HFC, and the greenhouse, the global warming potential of it is 1430. The mass that has leaked is 50 kilograms. So we just do a simple straight line calculation. It's 50 kilograms times the global warming potential of this gas, and then we get the value now, which is the carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's what we will be looking to report. Okay, so we go through it as we go through other discussions. Why measure? While measuring the greenhouse gas accounting, there are principles that we rely on because this is a global framework. Yeah. First is relevance. Yeah. The emissions reported represent emissions of the organization. It has to be relevant to the organization. It has to be accurate. So we try to be as practical as possible, and that's why we're going through the math. It has to be as complete as possible. We need to be consistent as we go through this measurement so that we can see our progress or deterioration over time and the effectiveness of the initiatives that we put in place to manage our emissions. And then also transparency. So we also have to have a clear audit trail for our data, where we're getting our data from, and other sources of information. So that's also another key area to focus on when you're looking at data collection. How verifiable is the data that we are using? Why measure the gases? Why measure GHG? We know that it causes the adverse effects on the planet, on the people, on our businesses. So it also affects our profit. But why measure? We measure because we want to make progress. Without a framework, a unified measurement for framework, we cannot baseline where we are, create targets of where we need to be, and monitor how the journey is going to be. So that's the objective behind this whole GHG measuring, so that we can know where we need to be, what's working, what's not working, and how to move that even faster towards lower emissions. So I'll take a checkpoint at this point, and because of time, I will not have it as an interactive one, but just want you to think through this one or two questions as we proceed. Based on the conversation that we had, where we had categorized the different gases, what would be the most potent greenhouse gas? Is it carbon dioxide? Is it methane? Is it fluorinated gases? Or is it nitrous oxide? It's hard to think about it in this framework because now maybe we've forgotten what methane, how it appears in our organism, how fluorinated gases appear in our organizations. So if you had something else as your response, our response, the most potent greenhouse gas is the fluorinated gases. So these slides will be shared with you, and you can reference slide 9 to find out how we came up to this decision. Very quickly, you can see here the different potential of the different gases that we have. So the next point after identifying what are these gases is to understand some additional basics. How do we build an inventory? We keep speaking of baselining. How do we build a framework where we capture all the emissions within our organization and understand how we're going to work through them? And it's a sequential approach. First, we determine, we understand our organization, and it's called through organizational and operational boundaries. I'll get into that in a bit more detail. After that, we select our reporting period and when we are starting. Then we go into identifying what are the different sources within our organization that emissions come from. What are the different sources beyond our organization? What are the different sources in the value chain? Then we collect this data and try and bridge gaps. Data might not be readily available across every single component that we are tracking, but there are frameworks for estimations. So we use some scientific estimations to bridge those gaps. Or also based on your organization's insight and knowledge and experience, you can make some informed estimates. And then we calculate the emissions, we report them, and then I'll start managing the entire inventory process. Key across all of this is just the integrity of the data that we're using in the decisions that we are making. So we start with the boundaries. Before an organization starts calculating emissions, it must first decide which parts of the businesses of our business are we actually reporting on. Which part of our business are we actually reporting on? So think of it like that, like the reporting fence. Different companies have different structures. You have subsidiaries, you have joint ventures, warehouses, you have operations, you have leased offices. What part of our business are we actually reporting on? Which emissions belong to us? And the GHG protocol we have mentioned before gives us 3 different approaches that we can use to determine this. The first is called an equity share approach, where a company reports on the emissions according to the percentage that it owns within a given operation. So say, for example, if you own 30% of a facility, or 100% of a facility, you will report on, you own those emissions as the owner of that facility to the proportion of your ownership. So it could be even shared spaces. Yeah, so you're able to identify within my physical facility, what do we own as far as a share, as a percentage. The second framework is a financial control approach. So here, the focus is on who financially controls the operation. If a company consolidates its entire entity into, its financial statements that it reports, 100% of that entity's, it would report 100% of that entity's emissions, even if your ownership is not 100%, because your control of the operation is different from your ownership. So if you have a higher percentage control, you report accordingly. And this is guided by now, principles like the IFRS, group accounting structures. Somebody is not muted. Thank you. sorry, this is aligned with now different reporting frameworks. It will also speak to IFRS reporting or group accounting structures. A lot of finance is the lens. What is the strength of our financial control over that particular operation? The third is operational control approach, which is most commonly used in sustainability reporting and focuses on who runs the operation day to day. If you control operating policies or manage a site, you report to the proportion of your control. How much control do you have in these operations? So those are the three lenses that we would be looking at. How much do I own? How much is our financial control? And how much is our operational control? And what percentage can we apply to it as we think through our business and our operations? So the operational boundary, as I mentioned, is the one that is most familiar, and also buckets for us the different scopes of the operations within our organization. So scope one, like we mentioned, is the direct emissions that are owned and controlled by your organization, your processes, the vehicles you own, and the emissions emitted from those vehicles, the equipment that you own within the organization, the emissions that arise either from normal use or even substandard or below par use. So if you have equipment that's not operating at optimal, how much emissions is it generating? That's the scope one, and very easy to capture within your organization. Scope two, like I mentioned, is direct emissions from purchased energy. So say, for example, electricity or AC cooling systems. That also is visible to an organization because you typically pay for this and you have a metric that shows you how much you're consuming. And scope three, now the other side of the operational boundary, is understanding what's happening further across your value chain. Emissions that come from the goods and services that you supply. And of course, now those are looked at either upstream activities or also downstream activities across your value chain. The objective here is to identify your operational boundary from a level of also control. Yes, the control is very important. The percentage of control that you have within these operations advises how we measure these three different scopes. The next process is understanding your reporting period and your base year. So it could be a calendar year, it could be a fiscal year, but you have to determine which period you're calculating your emissions for. And then you set a base year, which is when you start and say, this is time zero, and here you'll be able to now see progress across different years on the interventions that you're putting within your organizations. So to assess when base year emissions recalculation is required, the companies should set a company policy based on significant thresholds. In addition to these defined thresholds, companies can recalculate your base year if there are changes or if there's a change in the methodology or significant errors are found. So your base year is not permanent. You can come back to it, maybe say further down the line. If maybe say you started tracking and you already set your base year and there were some things that are materially different within your organization in terms of how you operate, you can come and recalculate this baseline. But it's good to get it right the very first time. Next is to map where are the sources of our emissions within our organization. Do we use diesel for our vehicles? Do we use petrol? How much of it do we use? Do we have refrigeration systems within our organizations? Do we operate cold rooms like in the agricultural chain or in the logistics chain? If you look at scope 2, oh, sorry, thank you for that. I didn't realize I was not quite audible. If you look at scope 2, you have data around the electricity that you consume, and you have electricity power bills that can help you determine that. Scope 3, upstream, the sources would be from what the inputs to your organization, where you're purchasing your goods or services, how is it getting to you, what are the emissions in the transportation and distribution of the inputs into your business, what's generated, what is the waste generated in your operations, what are the costs of traveling, the logistics costs of traveling, and the emissions that come from that. Scope 3 downstream would look at beyond your product. How do you distribute it beyond the creation of the product or services? What are the emissions in taking this to market? What are the emissions in the use and the disposal of the products that you supply to the market? And considerations around investments and franchises. So there are all these different areas or sources of emissions, and the objective is to see to our organization where do we have visibility to, so that we can start tracking and understanding how much emissions is being measured at each different point. I'll come to checkpoint 2. A company uses the operational control approach. So how much control do we have in our operations when quantifying its inventory? How should it decide which operations fall within its organizational boundary? Is it only the operations that it owns completely? Is it the operations where it can introduce and implement policies that now control? Or is it where data is available and can be collected? Or is it where operations, where they have partial ownership? So there were different controls. There was the equity, there was the finance, and there was operational. What would guide an organization in understanding which operations fall within its boundary? Because you're looking at the entire value chain. What do you own? Sorry. Question 3. What are scope 1 emissions? Are they emissions from buildings? Are they emissions from generation of electricity? Are they emissions from the purchase of goods or services? Are they emissions from sources owned by or controlled by a company? What lens defines the emissions? What is not a source of scope 2 emissions? Scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Transmission and distribution losses, or electricity, or cooling, or steam. So the organizational boundary is determined by the control the organization has, which is through its policies. So if we cannot introduce or implement policies towards a particular operation, then it cannot be categorized as falling within your organization boundary. So something that is happening further downstream or even your value chain, but you do not have control with a policy that can introduce changes in that particular environment. That falls outside the organization boundary. It has nothing to do with the ownership. It has nothing to do with the data availability or how readily available it is. The scope 1 emissions, the lens through which a scope 1 emission is defined is through the ownership by the organization. And scope 2 emissions relate to the purchase of energy. So the transportation and distribution losses do not fall within scope 2 emissions. How do we capture or collect this data? There is metered data, like I mentioned, your power bills, you have the reports from your suppliers, your volumes of waste, and you also have estimated activity data. So two lenses. One which is very, very accurate, you know, because it is measured and you receive, there's already existing processes and documents that capture and relay this information to you. And there is the area of estimation, which is based on metrics that are familiar to your industry or to your company. So, for example, units of production or square footage or revenues per Kenya shilling. These are guidelines through which we can estimate where we have gaps. So, for scope 1, activity data can be collected usually from common sources, like I mentioned. Miles driven if you're looking for travel records, or kilograms of leakage or emissions that's coming from service records of your machinery. So you have your AC system, somebody comes and measures it, they can provide for you that data. If it is vehicles out there, you can measure the amount of fuel that's being used through the accounting of fuel within your organization. The scope 2 data can be collected from similarly common sources, power bills, cooling bills, steam bills, largely bills. And then scope 3 can be collected from these other sources, like the distance and mode of travel used by employees commuting. If you want to track how much is being emitted by employees as they commute to work, that forms a scope 3. The spend or the amount of money that you're spending on goods and services. How much are you bringing into the organization as you develop your products and services? You can find that spend data from your accounting and procurement teams. Or if it's at the further end, you have waste and you dispose the waste, there are records on how this waste is being disposed, the quantity of the different types of waste. Do you have those measures within your organizations to call for the records from your service provider, so you can have visibility into the data that applies? Here are some scenarios where estimation may be required. So data for the full reporting period. Remember, we were in a process where we were saying this is the framework through which we will go through accounting. Yeah, we set our boundaries, organizational or operational boundaries, and then we go through the setting of our baseline year. Yeah, so we might have incomplete data for the whole the year, your fiscal year or your calendar year, whichever way you have set it. So you're able to extrapolate using partial data to sort of extrapolate what that gap would be. So maybe say we start in January to December and we're only starting this processing in March, and we don't have the data from March going upwards. We can estimate based on what we're seeing in the other years, as long as the business operation is staying steady. And then you can also make estimates where the data is not readily available within that particular unit. So the estimation methods that can be used are the spend. So how much is the power? How much are we paying? And that, of course, there are standard rates for that. What is if say, for example, your business has a published intensity, of building types. So say, for example, we know this is a commercial space. What is the average intensity that has been recorded for this particular environment? You can use that as a way to estimate. And then you can also have calculated intensity. So having a metric that fits your business, specific to your facility, that speaks of maybe say, if you're maybe in retail, or if you're in manufacturing, or if you're in research, there's a specificity of the facility, that allows you to create an energy intensity, which we then multiply by the appropriate unit you use to measure, to estimate the facility where you don't have data. So that just falls within your general company data. And we'll go through a few examples to make this clearer on estimation. So an organization has one each quarter. It has 2, maybe say, remote trade spaces and 5 co-owned manufacturing sites. So this could be maybe say a manufacturing company. Your HQ is on Mombasa Road. You have 2 outlets, and maybe say you have different spaces where you're running your manufacturing. Where do you have data readily available? In the HQ, you have invoices. So definitely you do not need an estimation method. They are your actual data. Within your retail or your retail outlets, there could be data available, or maybe there is no data available. Maybe there's just square footage. If there's no data available, you can use now the published intensity of that particular area, and there are metrics around it, whether it's a retail area in a particular geography versus a retail area in a particular geography. There's data to give you what is the intensity of that particular type of operation in a particular area. And then for the third space, which is your own manufacturing sites, you could have data around, electricity invoices or power bills, and the production of volume that's going about. The amount of information available tells you whether you go for a direct approach or for an estimation approach. And then each of these different activities that is running within your warehouse or your operation have calculated intensities. So maybe say you have one plant, it'll tell you, maybe say you generate 5 tons of a particular product. You multiply it by that average manufacturing intensity that is applied to that specific type of operation or warehouse, for example. So how do we calculate the emissions? We go through 4 different steps. We convert our activity data into a common unit, and then we multiply by the emission factor per different source. So different sources, we start by converting it into a common unit, multiplying it by its emission factor, and then multiplying your non-CO2 gases by your global warming potentials. We started off with that at the very beginning so that you can have that standard data for measuring, and then now you repeat this across all the different emission sources that apply to your organizations. So we mentioned that all emissions are standardized as a unit measure of carbon dioxide, a carbon dioxide equivalent, which say, for example, we have electricity. So we have the electricity use, and to get its emission factor, which is step 2, we get the metric tons of CO2 versus the megawatt hour, I think, megawatt per hour. So this calculation will give you, will be able to give you that emission of electricity in a carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay. There are factors to consider as you're doing this, and we call it emission factors. Location, where are you, and over what duration, over what time. You also look at the variability because of the activity source. So emission factors for diesel, for trucks differ from diesel for a Prado, for example. Emissions for using coal in a boiler, so you have the same thing, you have a boiler being used in 2 different locations, but is it running on coal or gas? Those emission factors differ. And there are different sources of all these emission factors. Largely of high reference is the greenhouse protocol. So in this table, you can see the different factors that apply to different types of fuel, for example. So if you look at table 1 and you say, for example, let's look at mixed electric power sector. Yeah, the CO2 factor there, which is the tons per which is the tons of CO2 that it will generate. Yeah, you can see how the calculation comes. You start off with your heat content equivalent. You go into your CO2 factor. You go into your factors. So now the other different gases that are there in, as we had mentioned at the very beginning, we have all these different gases. So we multiply them by their heat global warming potential to find the value that we need to report depending on what fuel we are using. And this data is available. We'll share the links of where you can pick up these tables to have some of these baselines within your organization. As you mentioned, you have biogenic emissions, which are emissions from biomass, which they're treated differently from fossil fuel combustion emissions, and they must also be reported separately. So the sources of these biogenic emissions should be accounted for in emission inventories under Scope 1. So largely for those who work in maybe say the agricultural sector or spaces where you interact with biomass fuels. So you're talking wood or agricultural byproducts or solid byproducts. So you look at each and convert each of them into its CO2 equivalent, depending on the tons and the boundaries and the controls and the percentages that you have, the level of influence you have about the ownership or the policies that govern that particular area. So an organization purchased 5 million tons of natural gas in its reporting year. The calculations for the natural gas are as follows. So you have CO2, which is how much metric tons of CO2 did we actually produce. And that one is multiplied by 1 because CO2 is our baseline. If we look at methane, we look at, you capture the amount, you multiply it by the metric tons of gas, then you multiply it by its carbon dioxide equivalent, and you get your value 0.14. And then again, you take your metric tons multiplied by the CO2 equivalent, you get 0.13. And then you tally them all. And then there you have your emissions just for the use of the natural gases across your operations. So if these gases apply to your operations. Companies must quantify and report to electricity emissions using the location-based, like I mentioned, versus your market-based. Your location-based depends on the average emission factors based on, power bills, electricity grid averages. They vary from location to location. So the location-based method reveals what the company is physically putting into the air. We're now talking Scope 2 emissions. And the market looks at the emissions that the company is responsible for through its purchasing decisions. As you operate, you create As you, so, thank you. Yeah, sure. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat room. And I'll respond to them at a point where we have a break. Yeah. So the location-based method reveals what the companies are putting into the environment, and then the market shows the emissions that you're responsible for through your purchasing decisions. And these two quantify your cost of purchase or use of energy, which is the framework through which Scope 2 is assessed. So let's go through this in an example. A company purchases power for electricity. Yeah. So how do you calculate what are the location-based and the market-based emissions across to capture your cost of use of energy? And remembering that these are not reported together; they are reported separately. So the objective is always, as always, so you can see here you have your conversion factor of 28. The objective is to capture how much are we actually buying, how much energy are we consuming, in what form is it coming in, and how are we converting it into the CO2 baseline to get our location-based emission. For our market-based emission, you'd take the same volume multiplied by your emissions, your factor for standardizing it to carbon dioxide, and the value that you get has to be reported separately from the location-based, but the framework is always the same. For Scope 3, we take an example of a cement, an organization buys cement and maybe say some plastic materials for its operations. So for the cement, you have an invoice which tells you that the supplier provides a product-specific emission factor, yeah, of 0.25 ton, 0.25 per metric ton. For the plastic, there's no data that you have been provided for, but the organization is able to determine based on the spent, on the amount, how much it purchased it for. And the environmentally related input-output factor resulting from your supply chain activities of the plastic. I'll just read that question, yeah. Of your input, of your supply chain activities in the plastic sector, in the plastic industry. You calculate them as follows. You'll take for cement, you'll say, okay, we bought 6,000 tons. We multiplied by our CO2 equivalent factor, which is 0.25, and we get our value. For plastic, we'll use the commercial value. How much did we pay? What is the factor that we are applying to this, which is 0.03, and then we get our value. And then we sum those two values that we will get. So on one side, we are using the tons. The second side, we are using the cost of purchase. And then for a different example, an organization generates 500 tons of food waste, which it disposes in landfills, and 200 tons of paper that it recycles. So for the food waste, you'll take your metric tons, again, multiply by your factor. You multiply by the factor of 0.58, which you have there, and then you get your particular value. For the paper emissions, you have the volume of paper that's being recycled. Its emission, its potential, so the ratio for its potential, and then you baseline it to carbon dioxide, then you get both those two, and those go into your Scope 3 data. Maybe I can take a point over here to answer some of the questions. I think I've seen some questions coming in on the chat room, and allow me to go back to where they are most relevant. Just moving to the chat from. So I need clarification on scope 3 emissions for purchased goods. Sorry, I need clarification on scope 3 emissions on purchased goods and services. Here, do you track for all your goods? And what is the best activity data to use between amounts of kilograms or the distance that the goods have been transported from? Let me see if I understand this question. Marcy, thank you for the question. Do you track for all your goods and services? What is the best activity data to use between the amount of kilograms or the distance for the goods and services? So you track, yes, for scope 3, yes, you track for all your goods because you're tracking the distribution. So you look at it downstream. And I believe it also depends on what data you have readily available from the weight, because you know what you have produced versus the distance the goods have traveled from. I would perhaps lean on the weight because you already know how much it costs to transport a particular kilo of, whatever you're producing across, to get to its end line. So I probably rely on the amount of kilograms to do the conversion because you know what you've actually produced, yeah, and you know how, the output that you have. Clarify why SBTI cannot verify emissions under France reporting. Sorry. The question I'm seeing here has gone down. These different frameworks, thanks for the question, Gladys. The different frameworks are set up with a lot of considerations. So SBTI in itself does not have, it cannot verify under France, and they are set up the same way because SBTI is specific to GHG protocol. I can't answer specifically why it's set up like that. And these controls exist beyond us, but guide us in understanding how to implement and measure the emissions. But I can push that question to one of our technical personnel, and then they can come back to us on if there's a specific reason why it's only under, where you can only track or verify under GHG protocol for SBTI and not France. The France reporting tool. So I'll just mark that and we'll get some feedback and share in our post-webinar communication. So I move to one learning objective, just to track some questions for understanding. What are some of the things to consider when selecting our emission factors? Time period, the source, the geography. Do we consider everything when selecting emission factors? What are emission factors? What approach would you use to estimate electricity consumption from a building if you don't have access to its utility bills? Will you not report it? Will you say, I'll take my average by my floor area? Or will it be an average method? Or will it be based on the spend? You don't own, or you don't have access to the utility bills. So you're paying a flat rate. What are some of those emissions? You consider everything. When selecting your emission factor, you must consider the time frame, you must consider the emission source or the activity source, and you must consider also the geography, your geographic location when selecting your different emission factors. What approach would you use for bills which you do not you cannot get, you'd do an average intensity method. We covered this in the estimation side of capturing of recording. Yeah, so you use an estimate because you do not have the actual data, as opposed to when you have the actual data. So hopefully I'll be able to answer Gladys's question somewhere around here. If it's not captured, we'll get back to you still. So there is a lot of interest from investors, from externalities, yeah, that create opportunities for us to mitigate financial risk from a carbon and sustainability perspective. And that's why we do this reporting. In many cases, it's one of the largest drivers of voluntary reporting, because of the investment or the investment opportunities that come from showing this visibility. If you have, there are other drivers, of course, for example, climate change regulations and pricing. Other drivers can include gaining a competitive advantage or edge by demonstrating how responsible your organization is, or how it is, you know, even just measure. You create a competitive advantage with engaging with your stakeholders by demonstrating greater responsibility for your operations and those that you have controlling, or even wherever you are on your value chain. And we have the different frameworks. So as mentioned, you have the global, you have GRI, you have SBTI, which is a science-based targets initiative. You have the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. All of these frameworks guiding us to better understand how to capture what is happening within our organization. Yeah. So the information that you require when you're reporting for GHG emissions, yeah, is at first understanding what are your boundaries? What is your organizational boundary? How are you consolidating? Are you consolidating from an equity perspective? What is your organizational boundary? What is operational boundary? We've covered the operational boundaries. Yeah. And what is the reporting period covered? So once you have set that, which of course goes into your baseline understanding your operating or your reporting environment, you'd now capture the different totals by scope. For scope 1 and scope 2, you first tally your scope 1 and 2 by scope. You do your totals by gas. And then for you total scope 1 and 2 emissions independent of any GHG activities such as sales, purchases, and transfers. Then you do your base year and historical. You mark your base year and your historical emissions if historical emissions are available. You also have to be sure that you are reporting your biogenic CO2 emissions separately, because those don't go in the same line. And then you determine the methodologies used to calculate. You use the methodologies to calculate your emissions and identify where you have gaps. Make sure that you're estimating and use the frameworks that are there to estimate. There is a lot of information that's covered that's not covered by the Kyoto Protocol, the 7 gases that we had spoken of. But some other optional information you can also consider is including those, yeah, which are not necessarily under those 7 gases, or data that's aggregated by business units or facilities, by source type or by activity types. Like that level of granularization is also optional. Yeah. And also information on offsets or reductions or verification statements. That's optional information that you can report when you're doing your scope 3, your GHG emissions. So the baseline here is where scope 3 emissions reporting is optional under the GHG protocol. While scope 3 emissions reporting is optional under GHG protocol, and calculating and reporting on scope 3 emissions is a requirement for SBTI. Yeah, so it is scope 3 emissions is a requirement for setting science-based targets, such that have targets that are verified. Yeah, but it's optional if you're using the GHG protocol for calculating and reporting. So different categories of emissions, how this would look like as you're doing your reporting. So your emissions category 1, scope 1 emissions, maybe say stationary combustion or the refrigeration, what's within our organization. Once you've gone through the conversions of whether it was multiplying them into your carbon dioxide equivalent, you tally them, so you get your subtotal for your scope 1 emissions. For your scope 2 emissions, you have 2 emissions that you're tracking, your location-based. So what is your cost of power, and what does that cost of power translate into an emission, or a market, and your market-based scope 2 emissions, which again is now translated into your carbon dioxide equivalent. So then you tally your scope 1 and your scope 2 location-based emissions, because we are reporting scope 2 location separately from scope 2 market-based. So you tally scope 1 and scope 2 location, and then you also do another tally of scope 1 and scope 2 market-based. And then that's when you now go into your scope 3, the structure of your report. And then, of course, you have the different data that you have based on the estimations or the verifiable data that you have within your value chain. You report them in this section. So then you'll have 2 tallies that you're looking for. One is my total, that is location-based, based on scope 2, location-based total, and your grand total based on your market. So you're always applying that lens of both. Yeah. So never putting them together, never putting your market-based and your location-based computations together. Reporting on GHG emissions or GHG performance in terms of your absolute performance is required by the standards. So, but reporting emissions on an intensity or intensity based, we had spoken of the intensity based or a ratio indicator per product output. I think we had mentioned some of those as we are responding to one of the questions, is optional. Yeah. So reporting emissions on an intensity basis can be helpful in providing information on performance over time for a particular facility, or improving between different parts or different sizes of businesses and operations by normalizing the figure. So it's good. It's such a good baseline or platform through which you can compare different businesses and operations. Collecting data on the key performance indicators allows companies to calculate your intensities. So you must always be collecting within your organization the key performance indicators. And these include maybe say how much paper we produce, how much paper are we using, what's our square footage, what's the rate, what are the intensities that are informed by this. So the economic intensity indicators would be now the tons of CO2 per revenue unit, per revenue amount of money generated or revenues generated, or the cost of the amount of CO2 per sales as far as sales are concerned. So those are the key indicators that you need to be looking for within your organization. The paper produced, square footage retail, the square foot of our spaces, the revenue generated, sales activities, all of those map onto your intensities once converted into your carbon dioxide equivalents. So your inventory program should have these different, should address all four of these different components. The method that you use should represent the characteristic of the source, and it should be consistent across your facilities. So there has to be a deliberate, your approach has to be deliberate to determine your, to know that the method that you would use would be guided by what you are measuring, and make that consistent across the board. So where emissions are reported at a facility level and aggregated at a corporate level, the methodology should be consistent where possible. The data should be founded on high quality. Your inventory should be founded on high quality data, and of course, continuous improvement. So checking the accuracy of your data, how are you transposing it from one system to another, becomes very key in the authenticity of your inventory. The procedures should be integrated with other corporate processes related to maybe say, to other processes, just to make sure that you have it's going across the organization. You make data collection easier. So for example, the data used in GHG related to selling products should be consistent with what is in the accounting office as far as the reports around those sales is concerned. So integration becomes key, especially if now you come to do the cross-checking and the verification. So making sure that these systems are talking to each other from different places. So the fuel, people who are purchasing fuel should know that this information needs to be captured in your reporting, and it has to be consistent as it goes to accounts, as it goes to sustainability teams, whoever who's responsible, or even decentralize the responsibility and have people come up with all that data to fill. The documentation requires high transparency. So the methods, the systems, the assumptions, they must all be indicated so that you can give authenticity to the report that you have created. So for example, if an organization has primary data that it has within its organization and has some data which is based on assumptions, all of these must be logged in to inform or validate the measurements that you're putting out in terms of improved emissions or otherwise. And that's how you prevent the greenwashing, by ensuring that these four different components advise the quality of our inventory. So there are, of course, uncertainties, and maybe broadly too. So you have scientific uncertainties or estimation uncertainties, which are allowed for. Yeah. So the scientific uncertainty comes when the process that we are trying to, the process of the GHG emission or removal is not completely understood from a scientific perspective. So for example, you have many factors that we mentioned, direct, indirect factors with global warming potential values that are used to calculate, to combine the emission estimates. These have some level of uncertainty. For estimation as uncertainties, they arise when emissions are quantified. So all emissions or removal of estimates are associated with estimation uncertainty. So it depends on maybe say the model which called model uncertainty or parameter uncertainty, where model uncertainty refers to the equations that are used to calculate the GHG emissions, and the parameter refers to the in how you quantify the parameters that you're using as inputs into the different calculations that you're using. So those create some uncertainties as you're looking through how do I improve the inventory quality of our GHG inventory quality. So understanding this uncertainty. Okay, great. I think it's back. Yeah. So the inventory management plan is a critical part of any inventory, any GHG inventory, and it captures all the information that we had earlier discussed. So, what are your boundaries? What are the methodologies that you're using? What are your emission factors? What are your data sources and processes for collecting the data? And how do you ensure that you have the right quality of data? What's your baseline year for structural and methodology changes? Where are you starting from? What are you putting into your organization in terms of roles and responsibilities and maintenance of the information that goes into your inventory? And how are you verifying that this is accurate? What are the audits? Are audits in place, and what corrective action is coming as a result of the data that is coming out of what corrective action is being taken from the insights from your GHG inventory. So some of the resources that are available that we can use as we are navigating these spaces are things around what are the emission factors for electricity or for combustion. Where can we get them? Yeah. So GHG emissions calculation tools are free, and there are some that you can find. We will share the link over here to the GHG Protocol website. So you can download things like the GHG emissions calculation tool or the greenhouse gas protocol. All of these are downloadable as tools in Excel, which you can use to capture the data. You have the Scope 3 Evaluator, which is a web-based tool from the GHG Protocol that makes it easier for companies to also measure and report from the organization. So we'll share the links as well as we share the resources here. Additional resources that you can also refer to for how those conversions are done for the global warming potentials of different initiatives. We'll share the links there that you can see here. So there's a lot of resources that would support any organization in actually calculating and reporting on your GHG emissions. So this, I think, is just an example of what I had mentioned before, what goes into your inventory management plan. And you can as well pick up some of these from the links that we are sharing that will come out like a checklist so that you can go through the process systematically and ensure that you're on all checks and balances. Some other additional resources that we can share that we'll also be sharing is the protocol standards and guidance around standards and guidance. So and also around climate center leadership. So all of these we'll be able to share with you, and you can refer to them as we come towards the end of this call. So we'll also share with you this file, which is a simplified GHG emissions calculator and other resources that you can use within your organization. Maybe I just see if I can jump into the question, into the chat room to see the questions I can respond to. Recommend the best approach for baseline data towards GHG emission for an organization. So thanks, Michael, for that question. So recommend the best approach for baseline data. I'm assuming this is baseline data collection. Or perhaps maybe you can put a follow-up question. Is this just how to capture the data, or I'm not fully understanding the question, whether it is to how you capture the data, or if you're just looking at the first part of your GHG inventory, which is doing the baseline information. Philip, I sell vehicles for a living. Under scope 1, we will capture the manufacturing emission cost for producing vehicles. Once vehicles are on the road and operating within their useful life of 20 years, are we still responsible? Under which scope should this apply, and what assumptions will we use? We have a car park of about 120,000 vehicles and we have no control over the customer's use. So, Philip, your question is specific, but also has a bit of ambiguity. So, do you sell the vehicles or do you manufacture the vehicles? Because that also determines your boundary. Yeah. So, if you are manufacturing the vehicles, you have a different boundary than if you are selling the vehicles. Okay, so you sell and you manufacture. So scope 1, then your decision, your statement is correct. You will capture your emissions for manufacturing within scope 1. And then once the vehicle's on the road, like you mentioned, it still applies because now you have scope 3. Scope 3 is the one that captures how the useful life of what you're manufacturing, or in this case, vehicles. So there is data and assumptions around the useful life of a vehicle. Yeah, and that's why we're sharing all of these resources, because you're able to find the estimated life of a vehicle and that length in period of time. You know how much it produces, how much emissions it produces in normal use. Beyond that, you have assumptions to quantify the emissions, the life emissions of these vehicles that you're using, and you own them under scope 3, where you do not have control over the customer use. So it's accurately as you put it. You do not have control over the customer use, but you are responsible for the emissions of the products that you create, and you report to them through the value chain. And the idea behind this is to also find out how can we reduce that influence without the control that you normally have within an organization. Yeah, so you would own the whole spectrum. I don't know if that answers you, Philip. You report that under scope 3. See if I can go up for a few more questions. If there are any additional questions, I'm happy to take them on the chat room. What does calculation look like? Go ahead, Michael. Dr. Musyoka, I see you have a question. You have your hand up.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm audible. It's just a follow-up question based on what someone had asked here, PO, Pilipodiambo. This is scope 3. When the vehicles are sold out there, when they go to an organization, you find they will be also taking them as scope 2, where they are scope 1 or 2, where they are reporting on the fuels they are using on them. So we need to resort into a double accounting, because you are accounting them as an organization who manufactures and sells them, and the ones they are with the customer who may be an organization, they will still be reporting them under scope 1 and 2. Thank you.
Yes, that's very clear. Thank you, Musioka, for reframing that for me. Let me mark that for response. I just logged this to one of my team members to come back to me affirmation on that one. But I've understood the question now. So how do we prevent the double counting, because they are also being captured by other people? So I'll revert to that one shortly. June Lancer, what's the best way to calculate emissions for refrigerants in a lodge? So you have each of these equipments has data sheets and data panels. Yeah, within those documents you have, within those documents that accompany the equipment, the refrigerants that you're using, there are emissions, there are the energy use of those. So I would rely on those data sheets that come with the different equipment that you're using, because they give you how much you expect. Even in the back of a fridge, it will always tell you how much emissions that you're using. Is the carbon credit market crashing? I think that's a very in-depth question, but I think it's the motive behind the carbon markets that seems to be failing, in my understanding. It is because you have people who are not improving operations within their organizations and seeking carbon credits without actually trying to swap, without actually doing anything within the organization. That's where I'm seeing the systemic failure. But the carbon credit market is in itself, its operation, its framework, it's functional. It is just being misused by organizations who are not working actively to improve the systems within their organizations. So just saying, we'll continue doing the things that we continue to doing, and then we buy some credits. That's where I see the system is failing, because of that lack of ownership of the internal systems within an organization to try and improve them. That's where I see the failure coming about. Just waiting on some feedback. I just requested for one of our technical personnel to give me feedback on Mustafa's question. If it doesn't arrive in time, we'll just respond to it as we come through with the post webinar information. Do we have additional questions that have not been responded to as I wait to respond to this last one? Is the method of calculation that we were going through understood in terms of how we are now standardized emissions as we report them, or where to access the tools we have shared? I will be sharing, like I mentioned, tools on where you can pick up the different spreadsheets and reference documents. Understanding of organizational boundaries. All right, I'm seeing a thumbs up there. I don't have yet a response for you, Philip Odiambo and Dr. Musyoka, but I believe in general, and I will come back to you with more of a qualified response. But you own scope 1 during production, and you're accountable for scope 3, both before, so through your supply chain, and after, meaning through the customer's use. Of course, you do not have control over them, but you must account for them and report them. I'll look at that difference, the nuances that were framed quite well and respond. But in general, you have those 3 lenses, those lenses which you look through it. Through scope 1, as you actually mentioned, you capture that, but you are accountable even without ownership of the after or consumer use of the products that you put into the market. I'll get a response very specific to this car example to share that. Any other questions that we could have? I'm happy to clarify as we come to the end of this webinar. Is there any way carbon credit market affects carbon monoxide in emissions? I'm not sure I can understand. I understand that question means, is there any way carbon credit markets affect carbon monoxide in emissions? The way I would look at it is carbon monoxide, our baseline, I may not be understanding your question, but I'll look at it from a GHG lens. If I'm understanding it correctly, how carbon monoxide would be converted into carbon dioxide, and then carbon dioxide, the carbon monoxide equivalent is what you put into your GHG inventory. So yes, it is captured, and it's also a way carbon credit market affects carbon monoxide in emissions. I think it's the reverse. Carbon monoxide emissions inform carbon monoxide emissions inform general carbon emissions, which is the baseline through which the carbon market operates. I don't know if I answered the question, but yeah, it didn't come out quite clearly. Okay. Philip Odiambo, is there a separate entity to verify the quality of data calculations or documentation? There are different types of organizations that support you to do verification. So many of them are these, they call themselves like accounting firms. So there is sustainability assurance, yeah, or assurance type organizations. You come in, you contract them, and they will come in and look through your systems and your frameworks and say whether or not whether or not your data is accurate. But yes, you can't get separate entities to come and do for you your verification. Okay. I think we're coming about to the end. If you don't have any more questions, I'm happy to come back at the end of this this webinar with the presentation for your reference. We also recorded this webinar, and we'll come back to you with the responses of the questions that have not been answered. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're coming to 11:48, 10 minutes before midday. Thank you very much. This was a very heavy unit in terms of the content, but I hope the framework is somewhat clearer than when you first started on this course. So thank you very much for following through. As mentioned, we'll share these resources with you and we'll respond to the questions we have directly in the chat room to see which questions we need to come back to you with additional clarity. But thank you very much. We'll proceed to end the webinar at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.